Just did a show and spent the check on. Tryna copy what I'm on. Nigga, get your own. Tryna pick a nigga bone.
Oh.
Right to brother.
Censorship. We're gonna get started. If anybody just let us know where you're coming from, what you like to learn today. I was trying to give a little cultural music here to get us adjusted and get us, it's the end of the week, so end of a long work week. Lots of stuff we're doing here, so trying to just bring the vibes. Okay, great. What's up, Joseph from Long Island? We got Steve from Manhattan. Hi, guys. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us. I think we can go ahead and get started here as well. So thank you for joining us for the OCM Regulations 101 walkthrough. We are definitely excited today to kind of talk to you about both the public comment period as well as the regulations that we have for your feedback. Right now, OCM and New York State are in the midst of a period where we are opening our regulations for feedback for everyone to allow their voices to kind of shape the future of New York cannabis. It's one of our most important times that we want to hear, from you and from your community, so that we make sure that these regulations mirror your voices and mirror what you need in your communities. So it's very important. And so we're just trying to give you as many resources as we can to take advantage of this moment. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our Deputy Director of External Outreach, as well as our Director of Policy, Jason Salmon and John, and we're going to go ahead and introduce them today so they can go over some of these regulations for you.
Thank you so much, Sierra. So I really am excited to be here today. I can tell you that John, myself, and our colleague Julian Vincent just got back to New York City. We did two presentations, one in Binghamton and the other in Albany, and we just got back this afternoon. So, John, do you want to say a couple words about that?
Yes. Well, first, thank you everyone for being here this afternoon. John Kagia, Director of Policy here at the Office of Cannabis Management. It's been wonderful to be able to be out in the communities talking about these regulations, helping people understand what we're trying to accomplish with these regulations and soliciting feedback. And so we're very much looking forward to the time we'll have with you this afternoon to share with you some of the kind of important elements within the regulations and plant the seed for areas where we would really welcome your feedback before we finalize these regulations and lay the next part of the tracks for this legal market.
Great. Sierra, should we get into the presentation? I see someone's from Buffalo here, Hudson Valley. Okay. Waiting on Sierra. Obviously, I think you all know we had some technical difficulties to start. Here we go. So we're going to go over some foundational information first. We know maybe everyone doesn't understand where we've been and where we're going. We're just going to give a couple of brief slides to really describe that and lay the groundwork for John to go in the regs. So cannabis in the state of New York, how we got here. So as a lot of you know, the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act was passed on March 31st of 2021. It changed the way we treat cannabis here in the state of New York. It legalized it. Just want to note that the framework is very different. So we're really focused on economic development, social justice, and public health and safety. Next slide, please. So in 2014, the Compassionate Care Act was passed, and that started our medical program and our hemp program. That was originally under the Department of Health. That is now under our control, the Office of Cannabis Management, and we also obviously oversee the adult use recreational program. So what's legal now in the state of New York? When we say adult use, we mean 21 and older. You can have up to 3 ounces of cannabis flower on your person, up to 24 grams of concentrate, referencing oils, tinctures, edibles, etc. And you can consume cannabis in your private home. I really want to note that this is still federally a Schedule I drug. So just to note, if you live in public housing, please understand, due to the Clean Air Act, you cannot smoke cigarettes or smoke cannabis within NYCHA or public housing. Just to talk a little bit about the barriers in public housing to cannabis. For example, tomorrow, a couple of colleagues of mine and myself, we're going into Baruch houses, the public housing in Lower East Side. We're going to be doing a lit drop where we let everybody know about the event on February 7th, where John and I will both be at Grand Street Development in the Lower East Side. So we do understand there are barriers for public housing residents, and we're trying to accommodate that. Next slide. So as of 10/30/22, home cultivation, it's legalized for New York State certified medical patients and their designated caregivers. You can have up to 6 plants per person. That's 3 mature, 3 immature plants, and a maximum of 12 plants per household. So here's an update on our office. As a lot of you know, we have our Cannabis Control Board. That is in separate and apart from our Office of Cannabis Management, where we promulgate the rules, come up with the policy, and then we pass that to the Cannabis Control Board for their review and approval. We have regular meetings online and in person. Our agency has been growing since October 2021. Our executive director is Chris Alexander, and we're still hiring. We still need to build capacity within our agency, and we're really looking for people who are interested in all areas within cannabis, whether you're talking about compliance, policy, community outreach. We are in the mid-hundreds right now as far as employees, and we really need to scale up to a little over 300. These are the licenses under the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. I really want to flag, and John will go into depth later, that delivery and on-site consumption was not in our big reg package that is out for comment now. That is the reg package that we'll be going over today. So still stay tuned for that. Next slide. Where we are today. So as a lot of you know, we had our conditional adult use retail dispensary program. Applications were due September 26th of 2022, and OCM received 903 applications. I can tell you firsthand that there was a lot of work that went into getting people to apply. We traveled around the state. We did 18 presentations cross-regionally across the state, from Brooklyn to Buffalo. We were definitely trying to make this program accessible as possible. These licensees will operate the first adult use cannabis dispensaries in New York State. There are 2 open right now. I believe everybody knows of Housing Works. It was the first not-for-profit card dispensary. And our second was a establishment called Smacked, and it is our first justice-involved dispensary with a father-son business, and you should definitely go check those 2 dispensaries out. or seeding opportunities. So our executive director, Chris Alexander, always says that social equity is not the thing. It's not a thing, excuse me. It's the thing of the MRTA. It's a lot of the reason, a lot of us came over here to work for OCM. And we can start with the fact that we expunged 400,000 records. It was automatic expungement. Community reinvestment, 40% of the sales, right, from the dispensaries, that tax revenue is going right back into the community. And supporting people that have been most impacted by cannabis prohibition. For example, CARD, you had to have, except for if you were not for profit, you had to have a marijuana conviction. So making sure we're doing the right thing. Required 50% has to go to social equity licenses. There are 5 social equity groups, and John will go into that further. But there are service disabled veterans, women, minority and women-owned businesses, CDIs. If you grew up in an area that was disproportionately impacted by cannabis prohibition, these are, and distressed farmers. These are the groups that are going to be prioritized in terms of social equity. I also want to flag, we have our Cannabis Advisory Board, also known as CAB. These are 13 members from across the state, and they're going to really be deciding where that 40% of tax revenue goes. Does it go to public schools? Does it go to drug treatment programs? Who are the organizations that are getting this money to implement this programming? So you definitely should really get to know the Cannabis Advisory Board. And just to note, the Cannabis Advisory Board is a separate entity than the Cannabis Control Board. So I stated that we did 18 stops for CARD. Our social equity team is hard at work. We've had 15 equity round tables that have targeted those 5 social equity groups under the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. We have monthly legacy meetings where we do confer with people that have been in the market and trying to accommodate them, because we definitely want to transition folks who were putting food on their table due to the cannabis prior to legalization. We want to transfer them and transition them into a legal framework. We also have our cannabis compliance training program. This is the first of its kind, really teaching, folks, cultivators and processors, how to comply with the state. And that course is already on its way. So this slide, for some reason, it keeps doing this, but I can do this just manually. So education, it's 40%. Drug treatment and public education is 20%. And community grant reinvestment is 48%. So, we're talking about public schools. If you were a local community-based organization and you'd like to run programming on the criminalization and history of cannabis, you could apply with us in our office for that grant. This is something that's monumental. It has never been done before, where really a lot of the tax revenue is going right back into the communities that have been impacted by the war on drugs. So sign up with OCM. This is how you can sign up for our updates. And please let us know what you're interested in. We have folks that check this every day to see what the tone is. So please sign up for updates. Stay connected with us. If you have feedback on these regulations that we're going over, or any regulation package for that matter that we release for open comment, you're going to want to send your comments to regulations@ocm.ny.gov. Just to note that send your comments in regards to this regulation package by February 13th. If you submitted a card application, you can direct all your questions to licensing@ocm.ny.gov. And I think that's it. And I just want to note, I am seeing someone in the chat speaking about we need to show more love to the medical program. I guarantee you in the next couple of months, you are going to see a lot of improvements with the medical program. We have a whole team led by my colleague, Nicole Quackenbush, who is, one of the leading people in the medical field. And there's a lot that's being done. So I'd really just bear with us, and you will have a lot of updates very soon. So I'm now going to pass the microphone to John so he can go over these complicated regulations.
Thank you so much, Jason. And thank you all for being here this afternoon. Very excited to walk you through some of the high-level elements that are included in our regulations. So over the next maybe 30 minutes or so, we'll go through three broad strokes. First, we'll talk about the regulatory process, so how we came about with the regulations that are now in front of the public for comment. And then we'll talk about some of the key components of the regulations that we want to bring to your attention as you think through how this market might be regulated, how this market might be structured based on our regulations, based on what's proposed, and where we're particularly keen to get your feedback. And then we'll talk about next steps in the process to finalize the regulations and lay the foundation for the next chapter of this market. So first, the regulatory process. To develop the package of regulations that are currently out for public comment, we did several things. First, we spent a lot of time looking at not just the regulations in other states that are legal for both medical and adult use, but also talking to the regulators in those markets, asking questions like, what do you wish you knew then that you now know? What has been particularly effective in driving the performance and success of your programs? What sorts of things, what sorts of issues have led to challenges in your implementation and regulation of your markets? What sorts of issues have been challenges for the licensees within your markets? Additionally, we spent a lot of time talking to stakeholders within the state of New York. It was very clear from the outset of this process that New York was going to be trying to do something different. And so it wouldn't be possible for us to, copy and paste regulations from Washington or Colorado or Oregon or California and transplant them here, because they wouldn't work both for the type of market that we're trying to build here and for the very particular kind of convergence of dynamics within the New York environment. And so we had these twin objectives: one, learn from the lessons of other markets, but two, also try and present a regulatory framework that, one, aligns deeply with our equity mandate in this market, and two, is authentic to and reflective of the very unique dynamics in the state. So we developed the regulations, finalized them on November 21st, when they were approved by our Cannabis Control Board, and then they were submitted to the New York Register on December 14th, which began the public comment period. So here's kind of where we are on the timeline. The draft regulations are currently out for public comment. It's a 60-day process that's going to end on February 13th. And once we close the public comment period, we'll spend a lot of time reviewing all of the feedback that we expect to get. Our current estimates are that we'll get well over 10,000 comments to these regulations. We'll review them, we'll consolidate them thematically, and then we will both amend our regulations, but also put out a parallel document that shows our responses to proposed feedback, or the feedback that we got from the community. We may not necessarily go line by line on each comment we got, but we are going to be very diligent in reviewing every single comment that we get and reflecting that both in our responses to the public comment, as well as integrating that feedback into our regulations. Once the regulations are finalized and adopted, then we can begin the full and final licensing for this market. Yes, we already have some operators who are licensed in this market, but all of them are operating on a conditional basis. And once the regulations are final and adopted, we'll be able to transition conditional cultivators, processors, and retail dispensaries into their final kind of licenses. So for those of you who may not have read government regulations before, just a few things to keep in mind. One, we have to go through this process. It's part of New York state law under the Administrative Procedures Act. So, yes, it is lengthy and can feel a little bureaucratic, but it is state law and a really important part of engaging the public before regulations are deployed. Two, please be specific in your feedback. We understand that there may be some things that you don't like in the regulations, and that's perfectly fine, but don't tell us, I don't like this. Please do cite the kind of chapter and verse in the regulations. All of the pages are numbered, every line is numbered. Cite the specific part of the regulations that you take exception to, and tell us how it can be improved. Tell us how it can be done better. That specificity, your specificity in the feedback that you give to us, ensures that we're able to respond in a robust way. And then finally, or actually two other things. One, as you're reading these regulations, just note the nuance of the distinction between where we say shall, so OCM shall, a licensee shall, a municipal government shall, because those tend to be the things that are required, are directive, and are our respective obligations under these regulations, and the difference between shall and may. And so generally for the things that are included under quote unquote may are the areas where we have a little more flexibility. So for example, OCM may require licensees to provide X, Y, and Z. Licensees may be required to do X, Y, and Z. So there's generally a softer and more flexible implication to the parts of the regulations that are done by may versus those that are done by shall. And then finally, please read the definitions before you get into the regulations. Every major section of the regulations is led by a list of definitions. Those definitions are generally a really good indicator of the things we want you to be paying close attention to. So if we've provided a definition for it, it's generally a term that is going to be really important to that section of the regulations. And so the regulations are a pretty good guide for key elements to these, the definitions are a pretty good guide to the kind of key themes that you should be paying attention to within the regulations that will follow. If you have questions during, particularly during this public comment period, please understand that, under the law, we are actually quite limited in what we can respond to specifically related to the regulations. Because we have to make sure that we're responding and making the responses available to everyone at the same time. So we welcome your questions. It helps us kind of think through the feedback we should be providing the market, but understand that we're not going to be able to answer all of those questions until the public comment period is over. And as I said before, once the public comment period ends, we will be making a very robust presentation back to the public, presenting our responses to the feedback that we have received. Next slide, please. So I cannot stress this enough. If you do not send your comments, your feedback to regulations@ocm.ny.gov, it will not get included in the public comment period, in our response to the public comment. So even if you know somebody at OCM that you want to share your feedback with, that's fine. But please also send your feedback to regulation@ocm.ny.gov, or else that feedback will not be included in the review of public comment. Any other addresses to which you send your feedback to internally to the agency does not, cannot, and will not forward your feedback to this address. You have to submit it yourself, and please do so by February 14th or February 13th, midnight. So let's quickly talk through regulation. There are 6 kind of core pillars that guided us as we framed these regulations, as we developed this market architecture. So one is we wanted to ensure an equitable application process. We wanted to make sure that there was no fear or favor given to people who were, for example, more deeply capitalized, had more resources, or had some other type of advantage in getting into the market earlier than others. We wanted to make sure that whoever you are and wherever you are, that everyone would have a level playing field to apply for a license. Two, it is clear from the way the regulations, from the way the law was written, from the way these regulations have been written, and from the very clear mandate that we have from the governor straight on down, that we're going to be prioritizing small and medium businesses here. We have seen in other states and other jurisdictions that because there's not been a lot of this pre-work done to try and prioritize small and medium businesses, within a very short number of years, you see the industry's largest operators come into these markets and very quickly command the majority of the sales in the state. There's no reason why that should happen in the state of New York. If New Yorkers are currently spending over $5 billion a year on cannabis, there's no reason for that opportunity, for that scale of demand to be centered on just a small number of operators. And so you will see in these regulations that we're leaning very heavily into trying to support small and medium enterprises and create an environment where those businesses can thrive and be sustainable into the long term. Third is public health and safety. We believe that this is one of the critical components of the legal market and the opportunity the legal market creates for protecting public health and safety, whether that's keeping children from getting access to legal cannabis. We know that illegal dispensaries are not carding people. They're not requiring people to show ID. We know that there's a lot of new consumers who are looking for information for how to consume safely. These are the things that the legal market does and will have the ability to do under this regulatory framework. And then finally, I'll just quickly talk about our focus on the environment, because I actually think this is another area which New York really has been a leader in the cannabis industry. We have put together the most comprehensive environmental regulations that any market has proposed at the outset. And it's critical that we do this early because, for example, we know that cannabis is the most energy-intensive most energy-intensive plant in our agricultural economy. So you'll see that we give a lot of thought to mixed light or greenhouse and outdoor cultivation because we're trying to incentivize our operators to move into less energy-intensive production. We give a lot of thought to things like recycling and waste management and the use of post-consumer recyclable materials. All of these are really important to ensuring that we weave in a deep focus on environmental sustainability at the market now, so that we're not trying to solve environmental issues stimulated by this market a decade from now. Next slide. So let's talk about the adult use regulations, and there'll be kind of four components here. We'll talk about the application and licensure process. We'll talk about what New York means when we talk about social and economic equity. I'll touch on some of the business and operating requirements that we call out in the regulations, and then we'll talk about the municipal government's role in this market. Next slide. So, as we think about building this market, one of the things we wanted to make sure was that our business community, our cannabis industry stakeholders, have the ability to select licenses that best reflect where they see the opportunity in this market. So using cannabis cultivation as an example, we don't just give you the option to produce indoors in mixed light facilities or outdoors or in some combination thereof. We also give you the flexibility to choose how large or small you want your cultivation facility to be. So at the small end, you'll be about 5,000 square feet. At the very top end, you'll be over 100,000 square feet. And so that combination of allowing you to choose both scope and size, we think will give our operators some real flexibility to find the business models that work best for them without trying to do this as a one-size-fits-all. And so section 120.3 broadly talks about the different types of licenses that we currently have included in these regulations. And there's a couple here that I'll call out. We do have a standalone nursery license, and this will allow for the production of seeds, clones, and other inputs that our growers will need to produce the high quality genetics we expect to see in New York. Processors are a particularly interesting license, and just worth noting that it is the only license in our portfolio of licenses where there are no caps in the number of licenses you can own. So we think that's going to be a compelling area, and processors are going to be a really critical part of this market because of the scale of opportunity that we see for value-added products. Very excited to see that just a week ago, the first adult-use beverages landed on our dispensary shelves, and we think beverages are just the first or just the next step in the diversifying product landscape in New York. So rich opportunity for processors and some flexibility there in terms of how you want to structure a processing operation. Two others I'd call out here. One is a cooperative license, which again, we think is a pretty unique approach to licensing in New York. A cooperative license will allow different cultivators under a well-defined cooperative model to get together and pool their resources in non-contiguous facilities. So you can have a single cooperative that has up to 6 locations around the state, but operating under a single brand. We think the cooperatives will be a particularly compelling opportunity both for folks who are already in agriculture as well as our legacy producers to allow them to expand their scale, scope, and reach. And so we're expecting quite a lot of interest in that license. And similarly, at the other end of the spectrum, we're expecting to see quite a lot of interest in our micro business license. I'll talk momentarily about kind of our approach to vertical integration and the fact that New York will not permit vertical integration, meaning you can grow, process, manufacture, distribute, and sell to the consumer. But we do have one license that will be able to do that, and that's our micro business license. You'll be allowed to cultivate on a very small footprint, but you'll also be allowed to manufacture your own products, sell those products, and deliver them to consumers. And so the micro business license will be the only license in our proposed regulations that can have that full vertical integration, but it's done at a smaller scale. So all of the details on that can be found in section 120.3. Really important that you understand that we have structured this as a 2-tier market. For those of you who have seen or know the alcohol industry, we actually built New York's market model very much off of the way alcohol is regulated in New York. And section 120.18 and part 124 of these regulations go into deep detail around how this 2-tier market is structured. It defines what the tiers are. It defines who a true party of interest will be. I'll come back to that. And then it defines what obligations you would have to report to us the structure and participants, stakeholders in your business to ensure we can maintain this 2-tier market. So what are our 2 tiers? We have what we call the supply tier. So let's call this the production side of our industry. It's cultivation, it's our nurseries, it's our processors, and our distribution it's our distributors who will be taking product from our suppliers to our retailers. And then the second tier is our retail tier, which will include the retail dispensaries. It will include on-site consumption. And yes, on-site consumption is coming to New York. And it will include delivery. You will note that in this current package of regulations, on-site consumption and delivery are not yet included. We will be presenting for public comment those regulations quite shortly. But just wanted to make sure that you're aware that those 2 licenses are going to be an additional class of retail tier licenses that we will be making available. Now, it's important to understand within this 2-tier framework, if you are a licensee or a true party of interest, so a stakeholder in the supply tier, you cannot also be a stakeholder on the retail tier. That preventing that vertical integration is one of the ways we ensure that small and medium-sized businesses can thrive, because we have seen that in vertically integrated markets, the biggest companies, the companies with the largest capital resources, tend to have a very significant advantage over small operators. So as in alcohol, we maintain this two-tier separation to allow a small and medium-sized operators to thrive. But in order to protect that, you will be required to disclose who your stakeholders are, so that we can ensure that not just you as the licensee, but your stakeholders aren't crossing these tiers. So please look at Part 128 for a detailed explanation of the tiered market and your obligations to communicate to us who your true parties of interest are. The application and selection process in section 120.2 walks you through what we're going to be asking for as you apply for a license. This is an area where there's going to be shalls and mays that you should note. It talks about the obligations of our Cannabis Control Board to define the application and selection process. And it notes that, because there's a lot of mays in there, it notes that the selection process may evolve over time. So all of that is covered in section 120.2. A couple of things about the application selection and process in section 120.4. First, please note that the application fees are going to be non-refundable, and there's going to be some variability in what the application fees are going to be based on what type of license you are applying for. Additionally, the board has flexibility to reduce, waive, defer some of the fees for qualified equity applicants. And so this is going to be really important to understand kind of how you might qualify as a social economic equity participant in this market, because you will have potentially some concession there granted by the Cannabis Control Board. So getting and keeping a license, section 120.1 and .11. So your licenses are going to be valid for 2 years. Critical to understand that earning the right to be a licensed cannabis operator in the state of New York is not a permanent award. Every 2 years, you'll need to demonstrate that you are still in good standing. You will need to demonstrate that you have met all of the rights and obligations as a licensee in the state in order to apply for renewal. And this section of our regulations talks about your rights and responsibilities, including your responsibilities to notify the office when you have changes in ownership. So again, to protect our two-tier market, we need to understand who your true parties of interest might be. So this may not be required if you operate in other sections of the economy, but within the cannabis industry as proposed in these regulations, if, for example, you change who your chief operating officer was, or you change who your CFO was, if you change who was the chairman or chairwoman of your board, that's something you would need to notify us to ensure that we can kind of review that new person and ensure that they aren't in violation of our true parties of interest rules. We have the board has the flexibility to prioritize equity applicants, and it defines in these regulations in section 121 what an equity applicant means. One of the ways in which equity applicants can demonstrate the qualification for that title is based on community work. So one of the things that we have written into these regulations, and we welcome your feedback on, is that a parameter for selection as an equity participant is your level of community involvement. It does not need to be cannabis related, but we're really looking for equity stakeholders who have demonstrated a commitment to the communities where they live and work, because this industry is only going to be successful if it is community driven, community based, and so that's something that we're going to be prioritizing. So section 121 defines the 5 groups that we are currently including in our definition of equity. And and those include people who have lived in communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the enforcement of cannabis prohibition, basically the parts of the state where arrests were most prevalent. It includes minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, distressed farmers, and service-disabled veterans. Now, to prevent what we have seen in other markets where an equity applicant is brought in to be the face of a business, but may only own 1%, 2%, 3% of the business, and then somebody in the shadow owns the balance of the company and really are the ones who are controlling the business. In New York's proposed regulations, the equity applicant must have sole control. So you must be a majority owner of the company that is applying for these awards. And we will be reviewing your paperwork to ensure that that is the case. So very quickly talk through just some of the rights and obligations for our major license classes. So section 120.4 and 123.4 both talk about the rights and responsibilities of cultivators. It talks about the environments in which you can grow in, the sizes of your tiers. It talks about some of the environmental rules we've put in place around agricultural inputs, the use of fertilizers and pesticides, the use of light and energy efficient technologies in indoor plants. It also talks about your requirements under the seed to sale system, which is going to require you to track every single plant you put in the ground through to the point that it is sold in whatever form it is sold. We're in the process of standing up our seed to sale system in the state right now, and that should be up and running in the next couple of months. But please understand that this is not just going to apply to cultivators, but there's a very specific mandate for cultivators to track in the seed to sale system all of their plants. Our processors, as I mentioned earlier, critical part of our supply chain, particularly as we're working to deeply diversify the portfolio of products in our retail shelves. 123.6 talks in detail about what you can and cannot do as a processor. It talks about, the types of products you can manufacture. It talks about, for example, if you're using volatile solvents like butane, what your obligations are going to be for the health and safety of your workforce. It talks about your packaging and packaging, labeling, and testing obligations. It even talks about kind of what types of ingredients you can use, what types of additives are going to be permitted in the manufacture of value-added products. So 123.6, I think, offers a really good overview of how we're thinking about the value-added product section of this market, and we really welcome your feedback if you're interested in the non-combustible or non-flower parts of the non-flower opportunity in this industry. Distributors, as I said, are going to be really, they are going to be the blood vessels that keep our engines running, getting product from our cultivators who are broadly distributed across the state to our retailers who are also going to be broadly distributed across the state. And so we're very excited to have this class of operator get licensed. And one thing we've written in there is the allowance for distributors to set up hubs for nominal additional fee throughout the state. So for example, if you're a distributor based in Buffalo, you'll be also have the flexibility to set up a distribution hub in the southern part of the state, in Manhattan, and Long Island or Staten Island, if you wanted to service the northern and southern parts of the state. So welcome your feedback on those regulations. 123.11 and 123.12 talk about the microbusiness license. And I've already talked a little bit about this, but two requirements I'll call out that we welcome feedback on. One is if you get a microbusiness license, you have to grow cannabis. So the way we have structured it is this is a vertically integrated license, but it is a vertically integrated license that can only work with its own product. So if you get a micro license, you can grow cannabis. You must grow cannabis under the way we've written the regulations, but you can process it yourself. You can sell it to consumers yourself, and you can deliver it to the consumers. Because we are requiring you to grow and you have then the flexibility to sell. We have written in the option of not having to have your cultivation and your cultivation and retail licenses co-located. So if you're downstate, if you're in New York City, then your retail location can be within 25 miles of your production facility. And if you're upstate, then they just have to be co-located within the same county. But you have the ability to not have those co-located. Next slide. I've talked already a little bit about the co-op licenses. Please read sections 123.13 and 123.14 carefully. We have both the definitions and the standards for a cooperative included in those regulations. And we say a few things. One, you can produce at scale, but you can wholesale to retailers, but you cannot sell directly to consumers. I also mentioned earlier that you can be geographically distributed. Your cultivation facilities can be distributed across the state. And finally, we note in the regulations that as a cooperative, each member has to have a stake in the business. So you can't have a single person be the head of a cooperative. Retail dispensaries. We don't need to, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I think most of this is going to be fairly straightforward. But I will note, if we have any card licensees, conditional adult use retail dispensary licensees on the line, the rules that will be adopted under these regulations will be the new rules for the road for everyone. So everyone operating on a conditional basis will be transitioned to operating under these rules once adopted. The first part of these rules, really straightforward, much like alcohol, there'll be a requirement to ID everyone who comes in the store. And we talk about the rules of how we expect that to happen under 123.10D. We also talk about consumer education. The office has put together a lot of educational materials that we want retailers to make available, but retailers will also have the flexibility to come up with their own educational materials, though we say in these draft regulations that they need to be reviewed by the office before published. We also talk about the rules for operating a dispensary space. So everything from where you need to store your products, where in the store and where in your retail space staff are allowed versus where customers should not be able to go. We talk about the rules for inventory management and tracking and what information you're required to provide both to the office and to the customers you're doing business with. And then we talk about your obligations for the technologies, the systems that are compatible with our seed-to-sale system that you will be required to implement. There's a lot there in Part 125, and we encourage you to read those in detail. If we talk about staffing at dispensaries, and in Part 125.4, walks through your obligations for recruitment and training. This is not going to be a position where you really should be thinking about bringing people off the street and train and allowing them to start working for you immediately. We expect our licensees to train their staff appropriately, to have appropriate training manuals, training of their vendors, to have deep systems for record keeping. And we are going to be reviewing these materials before you're authorized to begin operations. So we're expecting to see a professional staff, a trained staff, and all of this is intended to ensure both, not just compliance, but ensure public safety as well. We also have rules in 119.4 about retail premises, and I'll go through this really, really quickly because there's a few rules related to distancing and where you can be located that you should be aware of. So first, There are rules around how close you can be to school grounds and houses of worship. You must be at least 500 feet from a school ground, at least 500 feet from a house of worship. In Part 119.4, we talk about how those distances actually get measured, and critical that you understand kind of what those obligations are as you begin to think through where you might be located. We also talk about the required distances between retailers. So if you're in New York City, you have to be at least 1,000 feet from the closest retailer. If you're elsewhere in the state, or in a part of the state with a population less than 20,000 people, then you are required to be 2,000 feet from your closest retailer. But it is really important that you understand that, one, how these measurements are done, and this is articulated in section 119.4, but two, also understand that this is going to be done on a first come, first served basis. So for every new location that opens, there is created this either 1,000-foot or 2,000-foot buffer in which another location cannot be licensed. So we welcome your feedback on this, but really important to understand that if you get licensed, please submit your location selections early, because it's done on a first come, first served basis, and those who get an approved location then get that either territorial 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet radius of protection. And finally, critical that you understand that some jurisdictions within the state of New York have opted out of allowing cannabis retailers from operating within their jurisdictions. Please work with your local communities, your local municipalities to understand what the rules are before you finalize your plans for where you want to be located, because one, they have the full authority to prohibit these businesses from operating within their jurisdictions, and two, while some jurisdictions may choose to change their opt-out provisions, it is not guaranteed that they will. So know which local communities you intend to be located in and understand the rules that those local communities will be enforcing for this industry. And so just one final thing before we finalize, before we talk about next steps, and it's an important question here around what is included in these proposed regulations versus what is not. And specifically, the question is around the processor licenses and the fact that there may have been some discussion outside of these regulations that indicates there may be a different type of processor license beyond the three that are itemized in the rules. And I'll say this, again, because of the handcuffing of our public comment period, we cannot talk about proposed regulations that don't currently appear or proposed forms of licenses that don't currently appear in these regulations. However, if you think there needs to be, or there should be another license type, another class of processor licenses, we welcome your feedback on that. Please send us your feedback on that, because that's precisely the kind of feedback that we are hoping to get. And then a second question around how the measurements of distances is going to be happening for location selection. We actually describe that in detail in the regulation. So we encourage you to review the distancing requirements, the distance measuring requirements, as those are spelled out in these regulations. So please, the public comment period ends on February 13th at midnight. Please get your public comments in before then. Very strongly encourage you not to start reading these regulations on February 12th. It's long, it's substantial, and we want to make sure you've got time to digest all the information in there. So please start the process early, take the time to read, tell us what you think, be specific in your feedback, and in doing so, you'll help us build the most robust and the most effective program possible. So, public comment period ends at 11:59 p.m. on February 13th. Your public comments will be our Valentine's Day present. It is going to be a love letter to OCM, and we can't wait to read them. So please, please, please get them in to regulations@ocm.ny.gov. Regulations@ocm.ny.gov. So thank you all for being here. If you would like to receive updates from the agency, from the office, you can go to cannabis.ny.gov, where you can register for our newsletters. You can register for updates across all of the issues and themes that we are covering. And we have different publications based on your selections that you can receive. And follow us on social. We are at NYS_Cannabis on all the major platforms. So with that, thank you all for being here. Thank you for the questions. We'll be sending out the deck that has the slides we presented here, as well as some additional information for your consideration after this session. But we appreciate your interest. We very, very much look forward to your feedback and comments to these regulations. And we look forward to working with you all to build a strong, sustainable, and equitable program in the state of New York. Thank you.